Okay. Barbara Magneson?
Yes.
Where were you born?
I was born in Little Rock, Arkansas
And what year?
in 1934.
Okay. Well, what was it like growing up in Little Rock?
Well, it was a very peaceful place. My parents were not wealthy. They were both school teachers, and they were paid very poorly in Arkansas, which is a southern state. And most of the southern states are not very wealthy and don't pay their educators very much. But we were comfortable, and I had very good parents who were very, very loving parents and very, very hardworking. They both worked. And I had one sister, and the South and my hometown are places that I never want to go back to. And it wasn't that I personally had a lot of bad things happen, but as I grew up, I became aware, probably in my early teens, of something going on which I thought to be wrong. And as most kids are, born of conscientious, ordinary white parents, and you're taught to respect what they say, that they know the truth, and that all of the adults that are their friends and colleagues also do, the teachers, the preachers, and the mayor and whoever. And I began to realize that there was something wrong with our system of what I now see as fairly extreme segregation. It was like apartheid almost like in South Africa. And I don't know how I came to this realization, because I looked up to my parents and I really took all this to heart. They were the authorities and they didn't make mistakes. And my parents liked to protect me from any bad news or any news that adults might have problems, such as the husband of the church organist, who was an alcoholic and used to stagger by our house, and they couldn't keep us from looking out the window. But, they didn't like us to know these things. Life was supposed to, I couldn't even see, ghost story movies. And some children's adventure stories are just a little bit too much for them, and I had to stop in the middle of a big adventure. It was serial on the radio. So anyway, it was in this atmosphere that I began to have doubts about what people were saying and doing, because I don't know if you know what the practice of formal segregation was. If you've studied the civil rights movement, and a woman named Rosa Parks, who would, when I heard about Rosa Parks, and I thought back to my childhood about what it would have I mean, it was just unimaginable that a black person would refuse to go to the back of the bus. I mean, it was literally unthinkable. And when I heard that, I was in my 20s, and I just gasped. I just couldn't imagine a woman having that kind of courage. And of course it was a very, very important thing, but that was one of the things. In the stores, in the department stores, black people were allowed, but if they wanted to go to the bathroom or they wanted to have a drink, they went to their own bathroom, or they drank out of their own water fountain. And they were made out of porcelain, just like a lot of them are. There was a white one for white people and a black one for black people. And I started asking questions and so forth. And my parents had been very respectful of black people. They employed people, because my mother worked once a week, and when we were small, they were, stayed with us. And my first memory of a nanny sort of person was a black lady, and we were warned, very sternly, we were to treat her with respect. And the word nigger was never allowed in our house. I don't even know how I knew it, because I don't think it was ever pronounced. So in a sense, they were more liberal, but they were terrified of intermarriage. But whatever, it resulted in very unfair situation. And it was extremely influential in my life, not only, you know, for the thing itself, but it taught me the lesson that no matter whether every single person you know thinks something is right, it may not be. And you have to think for yourself. And that's what I've done whenever I've had a thing. So that was my formative years. And I loved learning. I don't even know whether my parents just encouraged me or not. My father would often get books sent to him by publishers to review for textbooks and things, and he'd bring them home. He also began to movies and slides and, you know, PowerPoint, forget it, but, you know, audio-visual type things were just beginning to be used. And certainly in the South was backward. It still is, about 40 years behind the rest of the country. Still is, and at least. And but he started this program. Actually, it was a career. It ended up being a career move for him. But he would bring home educational movies and slides and stuff to show us. So, you know, and I just loved it. And I always did well in school. And when I got to high school, where my mother was a teacher, I didn't ever have her in a class, thank goodness. But, you know, I had to start thinking about what I want to be and so forth. My first thought is I want to be a brain surgeon. But I was reading a little bit about it, and I realized that you had to be ambidextrous. You had to be able to use both hands. And I'm not well coordinated in the first place. It's certainly not using two hands. I thought, not that, scrub that. So anyway, I loved science. I'm born asking questions. Very, very curious person, still am. As the people around here are well aware, the maintenance people now can, you know, explain to me the mechanics of what they're doing, because I'm curious. But I just like to know, you know, why things are the way they are, and what makes things happen and so forth. And my science teaching wasn't very good in high school, but I had one of my best teachers as a physics teacher. And sort of became, and this was my senior year, and it became kind of clear to me that this is really basic science. It's getting down to the nitty-gritty of what makes things go and what is going on in the universe. So I decided that I wanted to go to college, and I wanted to get out of Little Rock. North Little Rock is actually where I live, so I was born in Little Rock. I wanted to get out of there, and my parents didn't have a lot of money, but I managed to get a scholarship to a very good school that's not well known, but it's highly rated, and at least it is today, and that was Washington U in St. Louis. And some of the presidential debates have been held there in the past few years. But, and they have a good physics department, and it turned out that the head of the university, who was called a chancellor or something, was a Nobel Prize winner in physics, and a very, very compelling man. I got to meet him, and he actually had some famous physicists visit the campus, and I got to meet some of them. But in any case, I decided I wanted to do that, but I was not clear whether that would really be a suitable profession for me. But I came in as a declared major for physics, and was also interested in teaching, and I ended up taking a second major, which was in education, going through, you know, practice teaching and stuff. But my life took a different direction, and the university experience was absolutely wonderful. And among the things it did was get me out of Arkansas. And when I graduated, I got a job in a very, very interesting place. I don't know if you've heard of controlled fusion research, which is, there's news about it. Fusion is the process of fusing or sticking together two nuclei if they want to be stuck together, and they have to be heavier than iron. and they produce energy. It's a form of nuclear energy, which can be generated from heavy hydrogen found in seawater, and it doesn't result in a lot of radioactive waste. It's an almost limitless source of energy and comparatively clean. And the kind of thing that's going on in the sun or in the hydrogen bomb. Uranium, which produces the current nuclear energy and electricity, produces energy by fission. To fission is to split apart. And believe me, I can't even explain to you why the different heavy atoms and light atoms. Some produce energy by sticking together, others by splitting apart, but they do. And the hydrogen bomb uses this reaction of fusion, and so does the sun and all of the stars that you see in the sky. Because the fuel is hydrogen and helium up to a point, and they get all burned up and they have to go to another fuel. But they've got these huge masses that press these things together and heat them up. And in doing so, they run around like crazy and occasionally knock into each other at just the right speed and angle and stick together and then produce more heat and so forth. That's the idea. And so trying to make fusion energy work is like putting the sun in a bottle, as we used to say. And it started out I started working at this place in 1956. It had not been there more than about 5 or 6 years. And had a very outstanding astrophysicist who knew about this reaction in stars, who had the idea for trying to do this. And he was a very, very remarkable man. He now has a solar system vehicle that's out measuring infrared, named after him. So he was well known. And I just had a bachelor's degree, and in physics you don't do much with kind of doing lab work, sort of half technician, half lab worker. Interesting work. Too much information on that will slow us down. But I worked a couple of years, and this was in a research park in a rural area right just outside of Princeton, New Jersey, and it was administered by Princeton, which was an all-male college. And speaking of all-male, that was also the makeup of most of my physics, math, and chemistry classes. And one of my questions about going into physics is that I never met a physicist, but I sort of knew they were mostly men. And I thought, what am I going to do in this? Here I'm this girl from the South, and raised in the 40s, and have people asking my mother why they're sending me to college and I'm just going to have babies and this kind of stuff. And but it turned out that we were good buddies. It worked out. I never had, I don't say never, but almost never had an obvious or even detectable amount of negative attitudes or behavior toward me. And this was long before the feminist movement and so forth. Maybe that was why it happened, I don't know. But the physicists were fairly enlightened people, and I think they wanted to encourage women to go into that field. So, but it was obvious if I was going to do anything in the field, I needed more advanced degrees. So I went back to college, and I went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison, Wisconsin. Interesting place. Walked across. I was hanging up my clothes one day because I didn't have a dryer with the washing machine that I was using. And it's interesting, you put them on the line and you clip them there and they freeze before you can get the clothespins on them. And they just evaporate. And when ice evaporates, it's called subliming, which I like words too. So that was, I worked there in, well, I was a teaching assistant the first year, and I really enjoyed that. But also then I got to be a research assistant and people doing some nuclear physics where they had a kind of a low energy atom smasher, and analyzing data on mechanical calculators, because there were no computers in those days. Although they did have something automated. They had a detector that was putting out data as they ran this machine, and it spoke to a typewriter, which was typewriting these rows and rows of numbers, which then had to be calculated. And I just was recalling that all of the 3 places I worked in the physics research environment, we had machines. I just love these big machines. And it was typical of all 3 of them. You run this machine till it breaks down. And then you go home and you rest and you analyze the data and you fix the machine and you start up again. So, I mean, we bring in sleeping bags sometimes. That was fun. And so I graduated from there, and that was the beginning of the space era. The Russians had launched a little satellite. I think it was practically just a reflecting ball, but it was the first thing that ever orbited the Earth that was sent up by humans. And I think it had a little radio beacon that went beep beep, and I remember hearing that, and you could actually see it. Maybe you've seen satellites, but sometimes you can see them when they rise up over the horizon and the sun is shining on them from below. But that was very exciting because that and science was really taking off, and it made it easy for me to get jobs because far fewer people were attending universities and colleges in those days and taking science and so forth. And here we were trying to build up the space program. We were getting into the Cold War with the Russians, and we had weaponry and all kinds of other stuff to do. And it was a really exciting time to be there, and it was easy to find jobs. So there's so many good luck, bad luck stories, or bad luck, good luck, whatever it may be. I was born in the middle of the Depression. My childhood was spent in the terrible years of the Second World War, and yet, in the sense of getting a job, as an example, the way history played out, I was in the right place at the right time. It was not the struggle that it is today for people in that position. But anyway, the aerospace industry was starting to build up. We were getting ready after Sputnik had been launched. About 3 or 4 years had passed, and in Southern California was where a lot of this work was being done, especially on the Apollo project, also on intercontinental ballistic missiles and stuff like that. And I got a job in a company called Rocketdyne, which made rocket engines, most of the rocket engines, and there were several different kinds in the Apollo project, were made by Rocketdyne in Southern California and tested there. And there was a test site on some hills outside, within sight of where I lived, actually. And I got hired to help do research on these engines. We got research contracts from different agencies, and we're doing, any of you take physics? Yeah, okay, so electromagnetic radiation of various sorts. Microwaves, ultraviolet, infrared. We were doing all kinds of measurements on these engines as they fired. And I don't know if you've ever listened to a liftoff of the space shuttle on television. It is, you get a just tiny notion of the sound of one of those things firing. And I'll never forget the first time I went with a technician. It was sort of after supper time, but it was still light. And the technician and I went up to this bunker. And the reason there's a bunker, because there are liquid fuel and liquid oxidizer. And if there's an explosion and they get together, you want to be in a safe place. And so we were looking through this thick window with this observing device and so forth. And this thing ignited, and I went like this. Oh, you know, she should have covered my ears. And this guy, this fatherly figure, was saying, pulled my hands away from my eyes. He said, "You look at this. Nobody gets to see this. You should see this." And after that, I always looked, because it was the most powerful thing I have ever seen up close, and scary and beautiful and, you know, and loud, and it's damaged my hearing, because nobody wore hearing protection either. So that was kind of interesting. And also, I got to do lab work. You know, there were thousands of people working on this project, and I got to do some lab work and investigating trying to fix some of the problems with these engines that we had solved in our company. But you had to do certain kinds of measurements to come up with the solution. And so I was doing these measurements, and one of them was on the engine that lifted the astronauts off the moon. There was an engine that did the braking, and when they landed, the descent engine, and we had the ascent engine, which was sort of on top of the other one. And it had been having problems with another manufacturer, and we had kind of short notice to try to produce one that did work and didn't have problems. And so I did some measurements, and they used them, and designed the little fix that we needed for it. And you can better believe I was listening live when the astronauts lifted off the moon with that engine. So it was nice. It was just a little tiny gadget, didn't even have any moving parts. But you know, to be a part of that was, you know, a huge part of my life. But the Apollo project just ended. That was it. Certain number of flights, done. Thousands of people were without a job. So I had, what am I going to do? Well, I had been, a part of my research contracts required researching information and finding out, you know, what we could that would be helpful in our work, and to make sure we weren't repeating what others were doing. It's called the not invented here syndrome. Well, they did it, but we got to do it here too. So, but in any case, the government didn't want to waste its money, so they had this, and I enjoyed doing that. I got it because I was probably the only person with a master's degree among the professionals. I was a woman, and I was last hired, so nobody wanted to do that work. But I got to sort of, there was no, well, they were sort of computers. They were punch cards that I could order a search on from another agency. But I got to look through these printed indexes, subject indexes, and look up these, not only a listing of an article, but a description of it, and sort of get a picture of all kinds of different things that were going on, and learning, okay? Learning new stuff, a little bit about a lot of things. And it turned out that that was what I was really suited for. And where can you earn a living not being a specialist? And it turns out, one day I got this brilliant idea. And because we had a library in a big company that helped supply us with these materials and stuff like that, and there were some people that had been trained as librarians, and I thought I could do that, and so I went to library school. And I went to it at night. It actually took me 5 years to get a master's degree in library science, but I went to USC, you know, University of Southern California. And the day I got laid off, and I knew it was coming, somebody told me that Lockheed, the aircraft manufacturer, which was also nearby, not too far away, was looking for somebody to do what they call literature searching for their engineers and scientists. And there are not too many people who have a technical background and also are a librarian and information science background. So, you know, and there are not many jobs either, but when it's called a niche career, you know, and I just happened to fit. And they just hired me like that and said, we'll give you any kind of, I hadn't finished my degree, that's we give you any kind of flexible hours you need, and so you can finish that degree. And then eventually I got a job at California State University, Northridge, which is the California State University system. There's got 20 or more universities now. And it's different from the University of California system, sort of like here. And, but it's a huge place. It's in the San Fernando Valley, and it's, 26,000 students, and it's a fairly good sized place. And they had a lot of resources, and I got to learn. I got to go take courses in other subjects. I really made a beeline for biology because I'd never studied that. But meanwhile, and that was basically, I worked there 24 years. So that was that part of my life, education and job. Interests, very, very, I just gave a talk to the Kiwanis Club here about my life, and I had to give it a title, and I said, learn and live, because that's my theme, is learning. I'm always trying to learn. And it's not just that, it's just something I just am compelled to do. It's like eating. I'm still taking courses of one sort or another, and reading and whatever. But so that, of course, is one thing I'm doing. I'm sort of a professional student. Another thing is that, and it's related, all of these, two of these, my three major hobbies are related to learning, one of which is travel. I have traveled internationally. My husband says, about 100 countries we've been to. Every time I try to count them, I think, what is a country? And there's a whole continent that doesn't have any countries on it. And I've been there. Is that a country? Well, not exactly. There's an island that is way, way far away from anything in the Pacific. Is that a country? No, it's a possession, or it's part of a state. And so forth. So to me, it was novelty and variety. That's what I was after. I wanted to see how people live, what it looks like, just any sorts of things that I could pick up on. And it just, very an interesting thing to do. And I started out with that. The first time I had any money at all, the first job I had was, by the way, my first job was at a place that had a code name because it had initially been classified secret. Because it was like the hydrogen bomb, right? Except it really wasn't. So they decided we're not going to classify it anymore. But it was given the name Project Matterhorn because this scientist who founded it got the idea as he was coming down from the Matterhorn in Switzerland, this big iconic mountain that you see on posters and so forth. And so I got to see that in my first big trip to Europe. The first summer when I was in grad school, I got sort of an opportunity to travel on a shoestring to Europe and camp a bit and so forth, and got to see the Matterhorn. That was a big deal for me. And I just loved the mountains. I really loved them. And I'd gotten a chance to climb one in Colorado on my first big trip, which is around the country, where I got to see Mount Rainier for the first time and fell in love with the Northwest. 50 years later, I finally got here. But I climbed a Colorado peak, and it was extremely hard because I was totally out of condition. It was a 14,000-foot peak. But getting on top was, a rush. It really, really was. It was just terrific. You see forever, and you're up on top of the world. And so when I was working at Rocketdyne, they had a recreational department that was. Are you ready to quit? Because that was had different interest groups. One of which was some mountaineers, and they were looking for new members. And I was totally out of shape, but after about 2 years, I became a fairly decent climber, and I loved it. And that's how I met my husband. And he was another mountaineer, and I was in my mid-30s by that point. and had been quite sedentary. I was the daughter of a star athlete, I mean really star. He was a football player, he was voted by some entity as the outstanding player in his football conference, which was the Southwest Conference, no longer exists. But I didn't inherit any of that. But I did find that I could keep going and going and going like an Energizer bunny, and I could carry heavy loads, and my feet always hurt me, but I just kind of ignored them and put patches on them and so forth. And knees too coming downhill, but I thought that just goes with the territory. So I did that for quite a while, and my husband thinks we climbed about 1,000 peaks, but that includes things you drive up even. So, but we did on our honeymoon, we climbed a peak in the Andes called Chimborazo, which is 20,600 feet. I discovered that one of my talents, which is at no credit to me, is just something, one of those inherited things. Do you need a problem? Okay. And that is an extremely good tolerance of high altitude, thin air stuff. I was with 4 guys, and one of them was pretty good, but I was the least bothered by the altitude of any of those people, and they could run circles around me at lower altitudes, because I was never fast. But I did well, and I could eat sardines at 17,000 feet, and it didn't bother me. Just about drove them out of the tent. But in any case, in later years, I've kind of and I did climb the Matterhorn, which turns out to be a lot easier than it looks. I have to tell you, and every other person I've met who's climbed it says the same thing. So it's, the easy routes. Now, obviously, they're harder routes. But that was terrific, and it was wonderful weather, perfectly clear day. And so, and my husband and I had got to climb that. But anyway, I continued mountaineering until my feet gave out. I had to have surgery and so forth. And but I developed a taste for the outdoors, and I didn't know what to do. And as part of my other travels, I kept running into birds and suddenly becoming aware. I mean, I was in my 30s or 40s before I knew this, that there are a lot more bird species in this world than are in this country. In fact, we have, as you go toward the poles, the diversity of species diminishes as you go northward and get into colder climates, and around the equator is where they're, especially in South America, is where they're most numerous. And they just so happened about that time, as I was sort of kind of getting interested, and I had seen, even on our honeymoon, we had climbed this peak, and then the rest of our companions went home, and we decided we're in South America, let's go see something. And we went down to the Amazon. There's a town that's halfway up the Amazon River, accessible only by air or water, and but it's a major town, and we visited that and got to sort of go out into the jungle. And in doing so, we were with a little tour group of bird watchers, and I'd never seen a bird watcher. I'd seen birds, but no bird watchers. Really, gung-ho, there's this whole spectrum of, devotion to that, scorekeeping and, collecting and on and on. It's like collecting peaks. Anyway, I saw these people, and it looked to me like they had a sixth sense. They could see these things that I couldn't see. Where are you looking? Where is this thing? They could describe it, and they could just... And I thought, well, that would be interesting, but I just don't have the sixth sense that these people have. I couldn't possibly do that. Okay, couldn't possibly do that. Well, I sort of got interested, and they gave an ornithology course, or a bird course in our local natural history museum. And the man who ran the course was sort of the local authority on birds and bird watching. And I was just off and running. I thought, we had little field trips, and I thought, well, I can't see all the hidden birds there are, but I can see some of them. And I learned that birds that I'd been looking at for years, I had never really kind of realized they're another species. I was just starting from zero. But I really, really got into it. And so that was my last big hobby. Okay, 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I combined that with travel, and I ended up seeing over half of the species of birds that were listed at the time. Ended up about 3 years ago with seeing about 5,000 species of birds. And all of the families in this particular listing, there are 200 families, which are groupings like the doves and the geese and ducks and the hummingbirds and different families. Crows are another family. And I've seen all of the families and got me to places like Bhutan and jungle in Mindanao and on and on. And so it combined travel and more learning. And while I was at Cal State Northridge, I got to take an ornithology course, which gave me, and very few birders do that. They're mostly into looking at them. And my main thing was just if you've heard the word hedonism, it means enjoyment, pleasure as a motivation. That was just, a real kick when you see one of these gorgeous birds doing some really bizarre behavior. It's just, nobody else has ever seen it. If you've seen the latest issue of National Geographic, there's a big article with fold-outs. One of you probably have seen that book. Do you have access to a National Geographic? Well, I think it's for December. If you know somebody who has it, or you're in your school library or wherever, try to find it. It's not on the cover, but it's a fold-out of the birds of paradise, which are mostly in New Guinea, which is a bizarre place to go to in the first place. They are some of the most unusual creatures, in the animal kingdom, and also truly gorgeous. So it's just one of those things. They listed 39 of them, and I've seen 28. 23. So, and anyhow, that's basically what I've been doing.
What was your favorite place to visit?
My favorite place to visit? That's virtually impossible to answer. The place that I keep going back to and kind of think I would like to is the British Isles. My family is from there and from many generations ago, but I just feel a real affinity for them. And so it's not very spectacular, but it's a place where there's always things that I'm interested in seeing.
I think we're just about out of time.
Yeah.
But you did very well. But
Thank you. Didn't give you much practice. I'm sorry.
It's fine. No, you're excellent. But before we wrap this up, I want to ask one more question. And I know it's a bit loaded, but do you think you've led a good life?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's